Well, hi folks, welcome to the LushOne Contour Module 203. We're going to talk about the ring modulator today, which is a very space age kind of sound. And we're just going to sort of start by explaining what it is, what it does. Then we're going to talk about how to use it in a very simple patch. And then we're going to actually go back to the LushOne bass and talk about the OSC mode, which we kind of touched on in the introduction but didn't really explain properly. So I'm going to look at that to sort of talk about how we use it with the ring modulator. And lastly, we're going to build an absolutely enormous mega patch using almost all the features of the LushOne bass and the LushOne contour. So let's start off with what is a ring modulator. Well, a ring modulator is very much like the voltage controlled amplifier we saw in the last module. It's an amplifier where the gain depends on the control voltage. But the difference between the ring modulator and the VCA is that in the case of the ring modulator, we treat the control voltage as having either a positive or a negative sign. And therefore we can invert the input as well as control the gain of it. Now in the LushOne, all control voltages have to be between 0 and 5 volts. So for the ring modulator, we treat voltages less than 2.5 volts as negative and voltages more than 2.5 volts as positive, and therefore obviously 2.5 volts is treated as 0. But we do have an offset control on the ring modulator that allow you to vary where that center point is. So perhaps best look at that with an example. So we take a very simple sine wave going into a ring modulator, and we multiply it by this kind of ramp wave that goes between -1 and +1, which would be between 0 and 5 volts in the case of the LushOne. And what you can see is where the input on the control voltage is negative, the audio wave gets inverted, and as the input control voltage goes through 0, then we obviously reduce the amplitude, and then back out the other side we get the original waveform coming through. And this kind of creates some very rich harmonics in the output of the ring modulator, and we'll hear those in just a second. On the LushOne contour, we have a ring modulator which takes an audio input between -1 volt and +1 volt, and a control voltage input between 0 volts and 5 volts. And as I said, we treat sort of low values below the midpoint on the control voltage as negative and above the midpoint as positive. And you can adjust where that midpoint is using the offset control, similar to the one provided on the voltage controlled amplifier. So what we've made here is a very simple patch. We've patched the output of oscillator 1 into the input of the ring modulator, and we've patched the output of oscillator 2 into the control voltage input, and we've taken the ring modulator output direct to the speakers. So I'm just going to play a note with the LFO on the lowest frequency, and let's hear how that sounds. Well, the pulsing you can hear there is just the rate of the LFO, and really that sounds not very much different from what you get with a simple VCA. But as we push the modulation frequency up, we'll start to hear some more interesting sounds. So let's do that. Well, hopefully you can hear there some kind of flanging sounds, and if we change the frequency, the wave shape of the second oscillator, we'll hear those a bit differently. And we can also adjust the offset, and actually you kind of get less modulation effects as we go through wrong offset positions, really non-central offsets. We've seen that the ring modulator works best at particular frequencies of the control voltage input, and actually it turns out that where the control voltage frequency is close to an integer multiple or division of the input audio frequency, that tends to be when you get the best effects from the ring modulator. And one way to do this is to have a control voltage source that is close to the actual frequency of the audio signal. And in order to support that, in the LushOne base we have an extra mode for oscillator 2 called OSC. So normally we think of oscillator 2 as a low frequency oscillator, but in OSC mode we actually set that oscillator frequency to be the same as the frequency coming from oscillator 1, the audio frequency. But we can also set an offset in oscillator in OSC mode by using a control voltage input and setting the mode switch for the frequency onto something like CV plus L. So we've built a very similar version to the last patch, but we've set the oscillator 2 into OSC mode, and we've set the input frequency into CV plus L, and we've just patched 5 volts into the control voltage input for oscillator 2. So I'm going to play a note here and then just slowly turn the control voltage gain for oscillator 2 either side of its midpoint at 0. We can also change the wave shapes, obviously, for oscillator 2. Really quite rich sound effects just from the interaction of those two oscillators using the ring modulator. And obviously you can use the filter either before or after the ring modulator to enrich that even further. I wanted to end with a mega patch that uses all the capabilities of the LushOne base and the LushOne contour. So we're going to take oscillator 1 output and run that through the filter and the ring modulator as different effects units. You can put those in either order, but I'm going to run the filter first in this example. And then we're going to use the ADSR and the voltage control amplifier to shape the output of that into notes. So let's patch that up onto the system. We're going to use a lot of patch leads to do that, and then we'll just quickly show you some of the stuff that comes out of doing that. Here we are with the mega patch set up. We're just going to play some sounds and twiddle some knobs. Let's see a bit what it does. Well, I think you'll agree the space age well and truly among us there. It's pretty mind-blowing. You can fiddle with it for hours and find all the things it can do. So that's kind of it for the LushOne contour. Hopefully you can make lots of interesting sounds, find your own configurations based on some of the stuff I've shown you, and good luck. I'd love to see anything that you produce that's interesting. Thanks a lot.